This video is going to cover the 4-4, 4-5, and 4-6 warm-ups. So for 4-4, this was our trig functions of any angle. For 1 and 2, it says given that the cosine of theta is negative 5/13 and sine is greater than 0, find the following. So first of all, the fact that cosine is negative and sine is positive means that this has to be in the second quadrant, where the x would be negative but the y would be positive. So when I put theta in a corner, it would go here. This is adjacent over hypotenuse, so 5/13. Remember, the radius is always positive. That means the 5 gets the negative. And this is a triple. The missing side there would be a positive 12. So when it wants the sine, it's 12/13. And when it wants the cotangent, that would be adjacent over opposite, or negative 5/12. Number 3, 4, and 5 says evaluate the trig function. 3 is tangent at 3 pi. Remember, our odd whole numbers fall on the left at -1, 0. And the tangent there would be 0/-1, or 0. Number 4 says the secant at -3 pi over 4. There are 2 ways to find the negatives. One is work my way clockwise to the 3 pi over 4, or go to where it's positive, which is in that second quadrant, fold your graph at your x-axis, and that's where it would be negative. The coordinate point there would be -√2/2 and -√2/2. The reciprocal of cosine would be -2/√2, which gets rationalized to -2√2/2, or just -√2. And the sine at 13 pi over 6, this would get converted to 2 1/6 pi. 2 pi is on the right, 1/6 would be the first one past it. Coordinate point there is √3/2 and 1/2, and the sign there is the y. So this is a positive 1/2. All right, now we get into 4-5, which is the graphs of sine and cosine. So this kind of breaks it down into how to find all the pieces, and then at the end we're going to graph. It starts by saying find the amplitude. So the absolute value of the number on the front there would be, that's your A. Actually, not the absolute value. The actual value is the A, which is 2. The absolute value of that is the amplitude, which would stay 2. The B is what's in between the trig function and the x. So the B is 2 here. And the period is 2 pi over B, which would be 2 pi over 2, which is pi. So then that's your period, pi. The first point would be pi times 1/4, pi times 1/2, and pi times 3/4. And I get pi over 4, pi over 2, and 3 pi over 4. And your first one is at 0 without the phase shift. And the last one is the period, which would be pi. There is no phase shift because there's nothing added or subtracted inside this parentheses. There's no vertical shift, and there's no reflection either. So when we go to graph this, your coordinate points on the x-axis are 0, pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, and pi. And your amplitude is 2. And this is cosine. Cosine starts at the amplitude, so it's going to be up here at 2, comes down, down, up, up, and here's 1 period of this curve. Okay, second one, find the amplitude, period, and graph. Y equals -3 sine of 2 pi x. My A is -3. The absolute value of that's the amplitude, which is 3. The B is 2 pi, so period would be 2 pi over 2 pi, which is 1. Your first key point's at 0, and then 0, and then 1 times 1/4, 1 times 1/2, 1 times 3/4, and the last one is 1. So it's 0, then 1/4, then 1/2, then 3/4, and then 1. So 0, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, and 1. And the amplitude this time is 3. and it's sine. So sine starts at 0, and normally it goes up, down, down, up like that. But because it's negative, that means there's a reflection here. So it flips upside down. There is still no phase shift or vertical shift. So the only change is that instead of starting or going up, we're going to come down, up, down, and then connect to make the sine curve. All right, now we get sine, and this time there's a phase shift because we're adding or subtracting something inside the parentheses. A is 1, so the amplitude is 1. B is 1, so the period is 2 pi over 1, which is 2 pi. And there's a phase shift, positive pi, so we're going to shift to the right, pi. Our first key point is 0. Then because the period is 2 pi times a fourth, 2 pi times a half, 2 pi times 3/4, and the last one is 2 pi. And this becomes pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2. Now to do the phase shift, we're going to take those points and we're going to add, because it's a positive pi, we're adding pi. So we get pi, this would be 2 pi over 2 plus pi over 2, so 3 pi over 2. This is 2 pi, this becomes 4 pi over 4, so 7 pi over 4, and this becomes 3 pi. So now our first coordinate point on the x-axis is no longer at 0, it's at pi. And then my period, or the amplitude, sorry, is 1, and it's sine. So we start at the x-axis at the first key point. We go up, down, down, up. Okay, now we've got cosine with a phase shift and a reflection. So the negative on the front tells us this is upside down. A is negative 2, amplitude is 2. B is 1, so the period is still 2 pi. Our phase shift is a negative, because it's the opposite of this, negative pi over 2. So my key points would be 0. We just did these. 2 pi times a fourth is pi over 2. 2 pi times a half is pi. 2 pi times 3/4 is 3 pi over 2. And then the last one is 2 pi. Then we're going to take all those points and we're going to shift them left, so we're subtracting pi over 2. And we get negative pi over 2, 0. This would be 2 pi over 2 minus pi over 2, pi over 2. This would be 2 pi over 2, which is pi. And this would be 4 pi over 2 minus pi over 2, so 3 pi over 2. So this time we have a key point left of our y-axis, negative pi over 2, 1 at 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2. And the amplitude is 2. But it's a negative cosine. So instead of starting up, going down, up, up, we're flipping upside down. And we're starting down and working our way up and then back down again. So my curve looks like this. Okay, last up is our cotangent, tangent, secant, and cosecants. So remember tangent, we still identify an A because we need to know how high those little quarter points and 3/4 points are. A is 1, it's positive, so my tangent's going to point up to the right and down to the left. My b is 1, and the period is pi over b, so it's just pi. Then we're going to take what's inside the parentheses here, and we're going to set it equal to negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2. Subtract the pi, or 2 pi over 2, and I get x equals negative 3 pi over 2. Subtract the pi, and I get x equals pi over 2 minus 2 pi over 2, so negative pi over 2. From the one on the left, we're going to subtract the period, which is pi. To the one on the right, we're going to add the period, again pi. So this is 2 pi over 2, and this is negative 5 pi over 2. This is 2 pi over 2, and this is positive pi over 2. So my 4 asymptotes are x equals negative 5 pi over 2, x equals negative 3 pi over 2, x equals negative pi over 2, and x equals positive pi over 2. So when we go to graph these, there's a lot on the negative side. You want to make sure you give yourself room. So negative 5 pi over 2, negative 3 pi over 2, negative pi over 2, and the last one is at positive pi over 2. Those are our asymptotes. Now we find our midpoints. So halfway between negative 5 pi over 2 and negative 3 pi over 2 would be negative 4 pi over 2, which is negative 2 pi. Halfway between negative 1.5 pi and negative 1/2 pi would be negative 1 pi. Halfway between negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2 would be 0. We're going to eyeball our 1/4 and 3/4 points, but we're going to mark that A, which is 1. And we're going to start down at the 1/4 point and then up at the 3/4 point. And make your curve. Okay, 2 is your cotangent. So similar to tangent, we're going to look for A because we need that 1/4 point and 3/4 point. That's 1. The B is pi. The period is still pi over B, so it'd be pi over pi, which is 1. And then instead of setting what's next to this equal to negative pi over 2 and positive pi over 2, we set it equal to 0 and pi. Divide by pi, and I get x is 0. Divide by pi, and x is 1. From the one on the left, we're going to subtract the period, so minus 1, and I get x equals negative 1. One on the right, we're going to add the period, so I get x equals 2, and those are your asymptotes. So from the left, negative 1, then 0, then 1, then 2. Negative 1, 0, 1, 2. Again, those are the asymptotes. Halfway between negative 1 and 0 would be negative 1/2. Halfway between 0 and 1 would be positive 1/2. And halfway between 1 and 2 would be 1 1/2 or 3/2. We're going to eyeball the 1/4 and 3/4. And we're going to mark A. And it's cotangent, so instead of it starting down and then going up, this is reversed. It starts up and comes down. So my 1/4 point is here, my 3/4 point here. And then connect them. And draw your arrows. Okay, now looking at 3. 3 is cosecant, which means we're going to graph sine. There's a lot going on here. You've got a negative, which means it's upside down. You've got a B, that's 4. And we have a vertical shift up 1. So the amplitude is 2. B being 4 makes the period 2 pi over that, or pi over 2, which would mean our first point, because there's no phase shift, is 0, and then it's pi over 2 times a fourth, pi over 2 times a half, pi over 2 times 3/4, and the last one would be pi over 2. So it's pi over 8, pi over 4, 3 pi over 8. Okay, so this is where sine would normally start here. It would go up, down, up. So I'm gonna mark my A, but it's negative. So instead I go from here down, up, down. And my sine curve would look like this. And then I'm gonna shift it, but before I shift it, I wanna draw the asymptotes because it's easier to spot them when they are on the x-axis. So everywhere there's a 0 becomes an asymptote. Then I would shift my graph up 1. So this comes up 1, up 1, up 1, up 1, up 1. And it would now be here. And then I draw my curves to bounce off of those key points. I need at least one more in either direction because I need my 4th asymptote. So I'm going to eyeball to the right here, this spacing. Get a little bit bigger. And that would come down. And my last one would be here. Okay, last one is secant. So we're graphing cosine of x minus pi over 2. So this is our cosine with the phase shift. My A is 1, so amp is 1. My B is 1, so my key points would be 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi before the shift, which is to the right, pi over 2. So I get pi over 2 plus pi over 2, or 2 pi over 2, or pi, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi, and here this would be 4 pi over 2, so 5 pi over 2. So now I'm going to mark pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, 5 pi over 2. And it's, again, it would have been cosine. So we would have started at the amplitude here, come down, up. It would have looked like this. I'd want to drop it down on either side so I get the additional intercepts here, which then become your asymptotes. No vertical shift, so I'm just gonna bounce the curves off your max and mins. All right, that's it. That's 4, 4, 4, 5, 4, 6.